Howdy. Today's lesson looks at the space race. We've been looking at the 1960s and we've looked at Kennedy, Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, the 70s, the rise of the hippie movement, protests, and everything. But we can't forget the 60s was the time when man reached for space, when we reached for the stars. And so today we're going to take a look at just some of the basics of the space race. I mean, it was a big deal leaving this Earth and going out there to eventually the moon. So let's take a look at it. Okay, it really starts, I guess, with Sputnik because Sputnik scares America. I mean, Russia is able to put that little aluminum beach ball with fins in space, and it shows that they're in space already. And of course, like we talked about, and if you could put something in space like a Sputnik, the next step obviously could be missiles. In the Cold War, that was a major thing. But Sputnik inspires America to get off its butt too. And of course, NASA is formed, and we're going to reach for the stars. We did have a space program, and we were reaching for the stars, but our first attempts were not really as glorious. The Vanguard rockets exploded. It was an embarrassment. But it was also a step forward because in those explosions, in failure, we learned what we need to do in success to get where we wanted to go. Okay. If you look at this picture here, you can just tell, look at the top of the missile, you can tell that this is not going to end well. And a lot of people were wondering, well, why can the Russians do it? Why can't we? And it made us look bad. But in the end, we would win the space race. But that's because in our failure, we were able to reach and say, hey, this is what we need to do better. This is what we need to do. And we're going to move on from the Vanguards. Okay. NASA, 1958, is going to be formed. And with NASA, it's not just going to space. It's all the science and technology that you develop in getting to space, the computers and everything that you need. There is such a huge outgrowing of just going to space. All the technology you created in getting us there is going to have so much more applications. John F. Kennedy, as president, was the one that was able to put this into words. His goal on getting to the moon was like, holy crud, we can't get to the moon because we really didn't even have a man in space then. But he said, we're going to go, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. We're going to get there and we're going to learn. And his goal of getting to the moon by the end of the 60s seemed outlandish when he made it, but that was the timeline, and that's what drove us to develop the different space programs that we needed to get there. All right. This guy right here is the first American in space. Obviously, the Russians had the first man in space with a guy named Yuri Gagarin. Well, Alan Shepard is the first American in space. He wasn't in space that long. I mean, his flight was basically just to put a man up there, but it showed that we could get a man up there. Yeah, the Russians were first, but we were starting to close the gap a little bit. Okay. So this becomes a huge push. The first push is going to be Project Mercury. Okay. Mercury is going to be the first step because we got to develop the rockets and the technology to get a spaceship up there, to get a man up there, and then to get them back. So the first thing is just to get men into space, but also to develop the technology and the infrastructure that we can start developing this next push to get it even farther. And so Mercury is going to be the first ones where Americans get into space. And the astronauts of the early programs are all welcomed back as heroes. A good movie, if you kids want to watch about that, would be The Right Stuff, showing all those early American astronauts and what they went through. Because there was so much we really didn't know what we were doing. I mean, they really are American heroes, kids, if you look at them. And yes, Shepard, absolutely. That's a huge thing. I mean, look at it. You're sitting on this rocket in this little thing right here. You've got a lot of trust in your scientists that you can get up in space, and then that thing's going to get you back down to Earth where you can get out of it. That's a huge thing. Okay. The next more important step is going to be getting an American not just up into space and then right back down, but to orbit the Earth. And John Glenn's going to be the first American to do that. John Glenn is a remarkable man if you look at his history. A pilot, a hero, a war hero. I mean, the man was impressive. He does this, Later on, he's going to become a U.S. Senator. He's going to do a lot of stuff. He served his country. John Glenn is a true American hero. And going around the earth, it's the next step. And we were proud of it. Remember, as a kid in the 60s, people watched the rockets take off. And each one of these missiles becomes important. By the mid-60s, when these are more and more things, I remember at Bennington, they used to take us and show us on TV, and we all, as a class, would watch the rocket go up, and we oohed and ahed because it was important. And it also not only gets us to space, starts to develop some national pride. And we're going to need that because the Vietnam War is going to test a lot of our national pride. But going to space kind of shows the best in us. Okay. 1965, the Gemini program. And walking in space, that's huge. Now you're outside of an actual rocket. Holy crud. Okay. But the big goal is going to be to get us to the moon. That's what Kennedy was pointing at. And all these things were building up to it. So the last of the programs is going to be the Apollo program. And the Apollo's program is the ultimate goal is to get us to the moon. Okay. Apollo 8, it's important because they successfully orbit the moon. Hey, not only we've got a guy in space, got a guy orbiting the Earth, we can get people to the moon and around the moon. That's pretty impressive. But the technology of getting us on the moon, that's even harder. Now, Apollo 11 is the one. Apollo 11 is the one that's going to get us to the moon. There's a great series out there called When We Left Earth. And I'd love to show you, if you were in class, I would show you a lot of When We Left Earth because it shows the technology, the science behind getting us to the moon. And it's just impressive. Another great movie, Hidden Figures, showing the computing of NASA and those people that had an input who society might have marginalized, but who were so important to the program. And again, Hidden Figures, great movie. You might want to watch it. All right, July 1969, Apollo 11 heads towards the moon. Now, Kennedy said we were going to get there in the 60s. This is 1969. And this is when we go. And if you look at those astronauts there, that's a huge thing to be chosen to be the first on the moon. I remember my family was on vacation, and we were in a campground, and somebody had a TV, a portable TV. And I'm telling you, the entire campground came together so we could watch. And I remember being a kid watching man stepping out on the moon was a huge thing. It was one of those moments you just never forget. But I remember man stepping on the moon and being so proud of America. I read about in Vietnam War, those people that were prisoners in Hanoi Hilton. When they got news that we had landed on the moon, they couldn't say anything, but they would just look at each other and point up towards the moon. And it was their way of saying, yes, America's doing great things. It's a national pride thing. We're the only country that's been to the moon. Now, there's a lot of people say, oh, it's a hoax. We never got there. Bull. And on the classroom, there's going to be some links for you to take a look at. There's a lot of these arguments. They try to use arguments with pictures and stuff. Why we didn't go there? We landed on the moon, kids. America landed. And again, part of the lesson on the classroom would be ways that you can prove it. But I think maybe the best one of all is the one Big Bang episode, the Big Bang Theory episode, where they shoot a beam towards the moon and then bounce it back. Kids, we've been to the moon. And if you look right here, Neil Armstrong stepping on the surface of the moon was huge. His words, this is a small step for man, but a large leap for mankind, is huge. We have stopped being just dwellers of Earth, and we've opened the stars up. We win the space race. It's a matter of national pride. But the space race is going to go for a little while. We're going to go back to the moon. Apollo 13 has problems. Again, if you want to watch a great movie, I would show you bits of this in class for Tom Hanks, Apollo 13, where they had a problem going to the moon, and they weren't able to get on the surface. But we were able to get them back to America, and in our disaster, just like in the earlier Vanguard stuff, in disaster, we were able to learn so much. We stopped going to the moon, though, in the 70s, kids. We haven't been back. Hopefully in your lifetime, we do. There's a lot of countries out there that have made getting to the moon a step for them, like the Chinese and others. Because if you can go to the moon, that shows that you are an advanced country, that you have the technology, the infrastructure, and getting back to the moon becomes a huge thing. But it's very expensive, and once you get to the moon, once you get the moon rocks, the moon dust, what next? Well, in America, we realize that you need to start developing other stuff. And so the space station is going to be developed, and that's going to be an orbiting space platform around the Earth where we can do experiments. One of the early ones, Skylab, came back to Earth, but we won't talk about that. But we need to get a new way of getting into space. So we start developing the Space Shuttle program. It's going to be a reusable spacecraft. If you look at the picture there, you see the spaceship, the spacecraft itself in the middle, like an airplane, takes off like a rocket. You notice the boosters and the tank to get it up in the air, does its stuff, and then when it comes back, it lands like a regular airplane. It was a program of a lot of promise, but also some tragedy. The Challenger blew up in '86. I remember that one. I came into where I was going to college at, and I came into the campus center. Everybody was clustered around a TV, and they were all talking about Challenger. And it was a sad thing. Ask your parents if they remember when Challenger blew up or Columbia blew up. And in both cases, tragic, flawed accidents. One of them, the heat shields were flawed. Another one, the booster rocket blew up. It was too cold. With Challenger, it was too cold, and the rings contracted, gas escaped, and the rocket blew up right after takeoff, which was tragedy because, of course, on that one was going to be a teacher who was going to teach her kids. And so there were a lot of students across America that were interested in that. Well, we would rebuild more ships. We had Discovery, Endeavour, and Atlantis, but the Columbia would also have an accident in 2003 and blow up. Eventually, we ended our space shuttle program. The shift has gone from just the moon now to further. When we get to Mars, it'll be tremendous. But first off, you have to send unmanned spaceships to Mars. You have to have probes to Mars so you can learn what's on Mars, okay? And some of these probes to Mars have provided pictures and they've provided details, and we're learning more about Mars. You want to watch a movie about Mars that's not historic or anything, you can always watch The Martian. But that kind of reflects man's hope someday that we'll be able to get to Mars and put men on Mars, women on Mars, people on Mars. That'll be a tremendous thing if it happens. Well, where do we end the lesson? We went to the moon. Will we ever get back? I think in your lifetime we will. And I think it'll be amazing. And I think you're going to watch the news and you'll be astounded, like a 9-year-old little boy did when he saw it on TV. And I hope that someday in your generation we get to Mars too. And who knows, if we can get to Mars, maybe even the rest of the space, maybe we can go boldly where no man has ever ventured yet.